Rachel Bennett was tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix, but the deep, bone-aching exhaustion that came from living in survival mode for too long. At 28, she'd mastered the art of endurance. Between double shifts at the corner cafe and late-night study sessions for her nursing certification, sleep had become a luxury she could barely afford. Her blonde hair was usually tied in a no-nonsense ponytail, her uniform always clean but worn thin, and her shoes scuffed from countless hours on her feet. Yet her eyes still carried something rare, a quiet, stubborn hope, the kind that refused to die even when life seemed determined to crush it. Her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, was the light that kept her world from collapsing completely. With pigtails bouncing and laughter that could turn a bad day into a bearable one, Lily was Rachel's reason for everything. For the long hours, the studying, the endless fight to build a better life. It was a Thursday morning when the story began to change. The breakfast rush at the corner cafe had finally calmed, and the smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air. That's when a man walked in, tall, impeccably dressed, and completely out of place in the little diner. His dark suit screamed wealth, but his eyes told a different story. They were weary, hollow, the eyes of someone who'd lost more than sleep. He sat alone at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and stared blankly at his phone. Rachel noticed the way he gripped it, like a man holding on to something that was already slipping away. She'd seen that look before, in mirrors, in hospital waiting rooms, in people pretending they were fine when they were breaking inside. When she brought his check, he reached for his wallet and froze. He patted his jacket, checked his pockets twice, then looked up with genuine embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I must have left my wallet in my other jacket. I can come back and pay later." Rachel saw her manager watching from the counter, ready to scold or humiliate him over a $3.50 coffee. She'd seen worse scenes play out, people's dignity traded for petty rules. Without a second thought, she reached into her tip jar, pulled out 4 crumpled dollars, and rang up herself. "It's fine," she said softly, offering a small smile. "Coffee's on me. We all forget things sometimes." For the first time, the man really looked at her. His eyes softened. Something fragile flickered back to life in them. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what that means to me. What's your name?" "Rachel," she replied, a little shyly. "I'm Jonathan," he said, standing to leave. "The kindness of strangers. Sometimes that's all that keeps us going. Thank you for reminding me of that today." He smiled, a small, genuine smile, and walked out the door. Rachel thought nothing more of it. She'd just done what felt right. Her shift ended at 2. She picked up Lily from Mrs. Chun, their kind elderly neighbor who babysat for a small fee, and walked the 3 blocks home to their tiny rental on Oakwood Street. The house was old, the paint peeling, but it was theirs. Warm, alive with Lily's laughter and the hum of hope. That night, after dinner, they sat on the floor doing a puzzle. Rachel watched her daughter's tiny fingers fumble with the pieces and thought about the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the car that desperately needed new brakes, and the nursing certification exam she wasn't sure she could afford to take. Life felt like an endless uphill climb. But then Lily giggled, her eyes shining with innocent joy, and Rachel smiled. Some things, she reminded herself, were worth more than money. The next morning was her one day off. She was making pancakes while Lily played with her dolls when an unfamiliar sound broke the calm, a rhythmic, thunderous word that shook the windows. Rachel frowned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stepped outside. A helicopter was descending right over the empty lot at the end of their street. The noise drew neighbors out of their houses. People pointed, shielding their eyes from the swirling dust. In their quiet, working-class neighborhood, helicopters simply didn't land. When the rotors slowed and the door opened, Rachel's heart nearly stopped. Jonathan, the man from the cafe, stepped out. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman in a sleek gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Rachel froze on the porch, clutching Lily close as the pair walked toward her house. "Hello, Rachel," Jonathan said, smiling warmly. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance. I had to find you, and I wanted to do this in person." I don't understand," Rachel stammered. Jonathan took a deep breath, his expression softening. Yesterday was the worst day of my life. He began quietly. My business partner, a man I trusted for 15 years, betrayed me, stole millions from our company, and vanished. That same morning, I learned my wife had filed for divorce. I left that meeting ready to give up. I sat in that cafe wondering if anything I'd built was worth fighting for. His voice trembled slightly. And then you paid for my coffee. Just $3.50. You didn't hesitate. You didn't judge. In a world where people with everything can be cruel, someone with so little, chose kindness. That small act changed everything. It reminded me that there's still good in this world. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I just bought you coffee. He smiled sadly. No, you gave me hope. Something money couldn't buy. He nodded to the woman beside him. This is Catherine Wells, my attorney. I'm Jonathan Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies. I spent the last 18 hours thinking about what you did and how I could honor it. Catherine stepped forward, opening her briefcase. Miss Bennett, she said formally, Mr. Morrison would like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your nursing degree. He's also creating a fund to pay off your student debt and medical bills. Rachel blinked, unable to process the words. I can't accept that. It's too much. You can, Jonathan said softly. And there's more. I've realized that my company has lost touch with the human side of healthcare. I'm starting a new division, one focused on patient advocacy and accessibility. Once you finish your degree, I want you to help lead it, not as charity, but because I believe your perspective matters. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. I'm not qualified for that. You're more qualified than you think, Jonathan said. Life has taught you what no classroom ever could. Empathy, resilience, compassion. That's what this world needs. He leaned forward. Please, Rachel, let me invest in you, in your strength, your kindness, your heart. You changed my life with $3.50. Let me pay it forward. Rachel stood frozen, tears brimming in her eyes. It felt impossible, absurd even, that the man whose coffee she'd paid for yesterday was now standing in her yard with a helicopter and a lawyer. She looked down at Lily, who was clutching her leg, wide-eyed but unafraid. Why are you really doing this? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan's expression softened with something almost fatherly. Because once my parents were like you, he said quietly. My father worked nights as a janitor. My mother cleaned houses. They gave up everything to give me a chance. I built a company from nothing, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what it means to struggle. Yesterday, sitting in that cafe, you reminded me that goodness doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from ordinary people who choose to care. He paused, his eyes glistening. I've made more money than I could ever spend, but success without purpose is emptiness. You gave me a reason to care again. Let me do this, Rachel. Not for you alone, but for everyone like you who keeps the world turning quietly, with no recognition. Rachel's voice cracked. I don't know what to say. He smiled gently. Just say yes. Inside the small kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and pancakes, Catherine spread the papers across the table. Rachel sat down slowly, her hand shaking as she read. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, books, transportation, even childcare. Another document listed her debts and the amounts Morrison Technologies would pay off in full. It didn't seem real. Lily toddled over to Jonathan, curiosity replacing shyness. He knelt down to her level, smiling. You must be Lily, he said warmly. She nodded. Did you know, he whispered, your mommy is one of the bravest people I've ever met? Lily grinned. She makes pancakes. Jonathan chuckled. That too. When Rachel finally picked up the pen, her vision blurred. She signed her name, tears falling freely onto the paper. Jonathan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You've just changed more lives than you'll ever know, he said. 6 months later. The spring air was filled with applause as Rachel walked across the graduation stage. The nursing cap sat slightly crooked on her head, her heart pounding as her name echoed across the auditorium. In the front row, Jonathan and Catherine stood clapping beside Mrs. Chun, who dabbed at her eyes, and Lily, who bounced in her seat, waving a bouquet of daisies. Rachel caught Jonathan's gaze, proud, warm, fatherly, and smiled through tears. After the ceremony, he handed her a small box. Inside was a simple gold pendant engraved with 2 words, "Stay kind." A few months later, Rachel walked through the gleaming glass doors of Morrison Technologies. But this time, she wasn't there as a waitress serving coffee. She was a director of a brand new division, patient advocacy and human-centered care. Her job was to bridge the gap between technology and compassion, to make sure patients were seen as people, not data points. She hired other single mothers, veterans, and people who had faced hardship. She believed those who had struggled understood humanity best. Jonathan often stopped by her office. He didn't hover or command. He listened. "You see things I never could," he told her once. "That's why this works." Rachel's work began to ripple outward. Hospitals adopted their programs. Patients received real help navigating the complex medical system. For the first time in years, Rachel felt like she was part of something that mattered. A year after that helicopter had landed on her street, Rachel stood on a stage at a global healthcare conference. The room was filled with doctors, CEOs, and innovators, but when she spoke, her voice was simple, grounded, real. "I used to serve coffee in a diner," she began. "One morning, I paid for a stranger's cup because he'd forgotten his wallet. I never imagined that small moment would change both our lives." She told him about that day, about $3.50 and the miracle of kindness. "In a world obsessed with profit," she said, "we forget that compassion is a foundation of every healing profession." That day, I didn't see a CEO or a broken man. I just saw someone who needed a little grace. I think that's what we're all looking for. To be seen, to be treated like we matter. Her voice wavered slightly. "Kindness doesn't just help others. It heals us too." When she finished, the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Jonathan was among them, clapping with tears in his eyes. Afterward, he approached her. "You changed my life, Rachel," he said. "Everything I've done since that day, this division, this mission, it all began with you." Rachel smiled softly. "And you changed mine. But maybe it's not about who helped who. Maybe we were just meant to remind each other what matters." Jonathan nodded. "You're right. We're all connected, more than we realize." Years passed. Lily grew into a bright, curious child with dreams of becoming a doctor. Rachel found joy in her work, peace in her home, and gratitude in the journey that had brought her here. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, she'd stand by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, and think back to that day in the cafe, to the moment she reached into her tip jar and offered a stranger a cup of coffee. That was the real miracle, she realized. Not the helicopter, not the scholarship, not the new job. The miracle was the choice to be kind when it cost her something. Because in the end, that's all any of us can control. Not whether life will reward us, but whether we'll choose compassion when it's least convenient. She glanced at Lily play in the yard, laughter ringing through the air, and smiled. Life had come full circle. Proof that one small act of kindness could ripple outward in ways she could never have imagined. And if you'd been there, you would have seen it. A woman once worn down by exhaustion, now standing tall, strong, and radiant. A mother, a nurse, a reminder that sometimes it only takes a $3.50 cup of coffee to change the world. Moral: kindness is never wasted. Even the smallest act can echo through a lifetime.